We heard there in the news, anti-government protests in Thailand are now in their 6th day. We'll speak to people in Bangkok. Plus, as pressure grows on the United Nations to send peacekeepers into the Central African Republic, we're going to be joined by the head of field operations from the UN. Empty chair at the moment, but he is on his way. And we're going to have questions from Paris and from London. And we'll discuss the popularity of controversial leaders like the former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. It's going to be a busy hour. If you want to get involved, you can in all of the usual ways. You can call us, you can email us, or head to Twitter or Facebook.
People are going to want to know.
Let's just say something.
Well, thanks for being with us. If you've got any questions for that head of field operations from the UN, do send them in to us, facebook.com/World Have Your Say, or using the hashtag WHYS on Twitter. They'll all come to me here on this tablet, and I will put them straight to our guest as soon as he arrives. But let me introduce you to a couple of other guests who join us for now. Jonathan Beloff is a student and a researcher for the National Commission for the Fight Against Genocide, joins us from London. And Julie Owono is head of the Africa desk at Internet Without Borders and joins us in Paris. Julie, first of all, what action do you think the UN should be doing right now to intervene or otherwise in the Central African Republic?
Well, thanks a lot for the invitation. What actions? Well, the question is a bit large. We've seen that in the past, UN deployments in the war-torn zones in Africa have not always been the success expected. So this leads to probably question the approach that should be fostered by the UN if the UN decides to intervene. Should it be only military focused? I don't think so. Probably a more holistic approach should be foreseen by the UN and by member states of the Security Council. For example, getting more interest into the social aspects of the crisis, because Central African Republic is not a new is not new in the war when it comes to war in Africa. The country has been unstable for so many years right now, and until even there have already been two peace missions in the car. So yes, not only the military-focused approach, but probably also getting interest into how to distribute resources, because Central African Republic remains a resource-rich country in the Central African region, but where the population lives, most of the population lives under the poverty line. So not only the military approach.
Well, let's bring in Jonathan Beloff. We've heard the United Nations in recent days say that the situation in the CAR is rapidly descending into complete chaos. Do you think that UN peacekeepers should be on the ground?
Well, at this point of what is going on in the capital and throughout the country, that there needs to be some force, some military force beyond the AU that's already there to bring some stability in the city, in the capital, in major cities, villages, and etc. And right now, the only way to get that, to be able to have any development politically, socially, economically in the future, is at least have the political space that comes through security, some form of it.
Well, let's pull up this video, which has come to us from Mark Kay from Save the Children in Bua, which is in the northeast of the country.
Central African Republic is currently experiencing the world's most silent crisis. Over 4.6 million people are affected, including 2.3 million children. Thousands of children have been abused, exploited or recruited into armed groups, whilst many more are succumbing to completely preventable illnesses like malaria or are going hungry. For those outside of Bangui, in villages like this, Boa, in the northwest of the country, school is often a distant memory. I've met children whose homes have been looted, villages destroyed, who've seen their parents beaten and best friends shot. Just yesterday I met a young boy whose younger brother, his 5-year-old brother, was killed in crossfire as they attempted to flee a village that was under militia attack. Save the Children is deeply concerned about the effects this is having on the country's child population. Like in all conflicts, it's women and children, the most vulnerable, who are paying the highest price.
Well, that video sent to us from CAR. Let's bring in Albert Rudasimboa, who is a journalist and political analyst in Kigali in Rwanda. Interested to get your thoughts on this, Albert. We hear this is a silent conflict. It's a conflict that much of the world right now is ignoring. Does that surprise you?
Well, coming from Rwanda, it doesn't really surprise me because we've seen these lines before, and it's I would say it's a constant repetition. No, I'm not surprised, but I wish also that the region itself also would be a bit more vocal about it. In fact, we have here a kind of template that has been on ever since the 60s, and that is now taking having a new shape after the end of the Cold War, and I think maybe it's time to revise to revisit some of our international institutions, just like the UN. Maybe it's an opportunity also to see that more crises in Africa of this type should maybe also push us to review some of our international institutions.
Julie, do you want to respond to that?
I'm sorry, I have to say I didn't hear quite well, but what should be said is that nature abhors vacuum, and the reality is that has been a vacuum in the handling of the Central African crisis. So obviously, although a lot of opinions today on the African continent might not feel comfortable with another intervention from international forces, namely France, backed up by a UN resolution, hopefully very soon, it remains that there should be, this is probably the best international legal frame that we might have at the moment. Indeed, the AU, as I think the previous person was saying, the AU has been once again, unfortunately, late to respond. There have been promises to send troops, I think 4,000 strong forces in the Central African Republic, and it's only yesterday, I think, that the announcement was made that the effective deployment would be made. On the other hand, there is also the region, the Central African region, composed of Chad, Cameroon, Republic of Congo, who have been trying to find a solution, but unfortunately, once again, the FOMAC, which was the force deployed until now in Central African Republic, has been failing in its missions. And last but not least, the Central African government is totally unable to handle such crises, as we have seen recently in the history. The country has never been really ruled with strong institutions. So although we might not there might be disagreement on the intervention of the UN, the reality is that the regional organization, which probably is the one who should come up with a solution, has been a bit late to respond, unfortunately.
Well, Julie, Jonathan and Albert, do stay with us because very soon we're going to be joined by that head of field operations for the UN. We can put your questions to him and also questions from our guests. But for the next few minutes, we're going to turn our attention to Thailand. And as we were saying in the news at the beginning of the programme, it's the 6th day of anti-government protests there. The Thai Prime Minister has come out and said she will not stand down. There will not be early elections, but equally there will not be violent crackdown on protesters. Let's cross straight over to Bangkok now and speak to our guest, Suluk Lambul, who's a reporter for Prachatai, which is a non-profit news website in Bangkok. Suluk, I appreciate it's late at night, just after 10 o'clock there. Give us an idea of what's been happening throughout the day and what the situation is like there now.
So basically what's happening is that the anti-government protesters has been occupying the Ministry of Finance as well as the government complex in Bangkok, and now they said they will not negotiate with the government in any circumstance, but they said that they will have their final showdown in 2 days, so that will end in Sunday, and the government must resign on Sunday. But as you told us, the government said they will not resign either and has offered dialogue for a peaceful solution with the protesters, but they said that the only way that this will end is the government needs to resign, and they would establish this so-called People's Assembly, which will be sort of the national government comprising of representatives from every sectors and selecting so-called good people to be sitting in this national government without any election in the future, sort of, in a way. Yeah.
Well, let's pull up this video, which is of the Thai Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra speaking to the BBC's Jonathan Head.
It's democracy. I think this is the way that the thing should be. So that's why myself and my government, I came from the election. So I think the election and the democracy has the process to monitor and to be judged and to evaluate myself that whether I should be in this position or not.
Well, what's your reaction to that, Suluk? What is the response people are giving to the response from the Thai Prime Minister?
A lot of academic groups as well as the civil societies have come up with the suggestions for the government to dissolve the parliament because it's the only way to avoid the bloodshed which we have had enough in the past couple of years, which is one way for the government to think about to avoid the future crackdown. But I think right now the Prime Minister still sort of has the legitimacy to govern because the demand of the protesters has been quite unrealistic and not very concrete, because they said that if the government resign and hold the new election, they will also not participate in this election. So the demand of the anti-government protesters is not very clear either. So let's see how the government would plan out after this.
Suluk Lambul, reporter for Prachatai, thank you for joining us live from Bangkok. We'll be returning to talk about Thailand a little bit later on. If you want to send us a video yourself, you can go to worldhaveyoursay.com and upload a video there, or you can WhatsApp us if you go to facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay. All of the details are there, but do stay with us, plenty more to come on World Have Your Say.
No, I actually talking about it.
Let me say something.
No, I actually talking about it.
Let me say something.
Welcome back to World Have Your Say. I'm pleased to say that the head of UN Field Operations is now with us to take your questions, and plenty of them coming in. I want to cross straight over to Anders Kompass, head of UN Field Operations and Technical Cooperation Division in Geneva. So thank you for joining us. Lots of questions coming in. I want to get straight to them. First of all, Sebastian in Mauritius has posted on Facebook, since the Central African Republic is a landlocked country, can the state of utter chaos that it's in affect regional stability? What's your view on that?
First of all, I think the situation is really alarming in Central African Republic for the population there. They are hungry, they're afraid, they're scared, they're being forced to leave their homes, and they're also taking refuge in some of their neighboring countries. And there are also incursions by armed actors from some of the neighboring countries. So yes, if this continues, it can absolutely have regional ramifications that will affect more countries than just Central African Republic.
And I know that yourself, you've just returned recently from the CAR. Just give us an idea of what you witnessed yourself.
I think it's really one of these terrible situations where you're coming to a country where there is no functioning state. Think about being completely left alone and being under attack by armed groups, men who are raping women, looting and destroying your home, or attacking your children when they are going to a school that probably already has been destroyed by these armed groups. So it's one of these terrible scenarios where people are being left completely alone to the people that have weapons, and they are using violence as a way of living and taking power. So it's a really dramatic situation, and I went to see some of the places outside of the capital, Bangui, especially to a place called Bosangoa, where the population has been completely divided also between the Christian part and the Muslim part. There are no relationship between the two communities any longer, and there's a lot of fear and accusations among the groups that they are being under attack. They're afraid of each other because they also now is a religious element in this crisis that, of course, is very, very concerning for the future.
Well, I'm pleased to say that Julie Owono from Internet Without Borders, Jonathan Beeloff, who's from the National Commission for the Fight Against Genocide, and also Albert Rudasimbowa, who's a journalist and political analyst in Kigali, are all back with us. And I know that you're all very keen to get involved and ask questions. So I'll step right back and let you four have a conversation. But maybe we can start with Julie. I know you have a question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the assessment made by the field operation officer, chief officer. Well, I wanted to ask a precise question. Since most of the deployments of UN peace operations have been to Africa in the 50 past years, namely 77%, I think, and since most of the budget dedicated to peacekeeping operations were dedicated to African deployments, but with the mitigated results we have witnessed, I wanted to ask if you think that maybe the solution might be also regional. What I'm trying to ask is whether there should be more diplomatic pressures on the countries like Cameroon, Republic of Congo, Chad, and even Nigeria, which is not far from the Central African region as well, whether there should be diplomatic pressures for these countries to be at the forefront of the diplomatic and, the solution and of the Central African crisis. Thank you.
I think they already are. This is really a responsibility taken up by the neighbors of Central African Republic and the African Union. They are the ones that are having military forces already on the ground. And apart from them, I think it's only France that have troops on the ground. But I think there's a recognition now that even from the African neighbors and friends of Central Africa themselves, that this is not enough. They need to have the support from the international community and from the United Nations at the highest level. That's why it's now being discussed in the Security Council. And the question is, of course, what is the best response? What is the quickest response? Because I think the really question of time here, which is very important. People cannot wait for many more months because they are living under very desperate conditions. And that's why it's so important that, in spite of what you said about the past, I think it's important now for the international community to help the Central African population and the neighboring countries to stabilize the situation, give protection to the people. And I'm working for human rights, so I'm not in charge of the whole field operation in Central African Republic. But from a human rights perspective, we believe that if there is a strong positive response from the African and the international community to stabilize the situation, gain control over these armed actors, there is a space for us as civilian human rights monitors and officers to fill the gap in creating the right conditions for people to reconstitute their lives and hopefully also in the long term to regain confidence that has been destroyed in many of these communities because of this ethnic and religious dimension of the conflict.
But what is the breathing space giving to a human rights focused approach compared to the military approach?
Well, I think it's very difficult we are already on the ground, but it's very difficult also for our people on the ground. Mainly, many of them are from African countries or from Central Africa country itself, to be able to move in many of these villages and towns that are under the control of these military groups, armed groups. So we need to have also protection for everyone now that is living and working. And that is the hope that peacekeepers coming from Africa or coming from the United Nations can help to create that space and give more protection to the civilian population. That can then be filled by us civilians, who can then help the civilian population in terms of health, education, rebuilding their homes, gaining confidence in the future.
Jonathan, I know that you're keen to ask a question as well.
It looks like right now that by next month there'll be more AU peacekeepers, over 3,600 if I believe, and France now is saying once they get the okay, the approval from the UN Security Council, they'll be willing to send an additional 1,000 troops. Now my question is, will the establishment, let's say that there is a UN mission, etc., for peacekeepers, will the military general, the commander of these troops, really have the flexibility and freedom and thus not have a repeat of what happened with Romeo Dallaire in 1994, where in Rwanda he wanted to move troops, he wanted to be active when he knew Interahamwe other extremist groups were, but the bureaucracy set up from Kigali to New York prevented that. So if there is a big peacekeeping mission with the United Nations involved, will people on the ground have the flexibility and not be caught in some of the bureaucracy that unfortunately is known with the UN in Africa?
What I can hear from the leadership of United Nations in New York and my own boss, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, is that there is a great awareness of the importance of having a flexible and good response on the ground in order to protect the civilians and the population. I think that is the lessons learned from so many crises in the past. You mentioned, of course, the most tragic one in Rwanda. And that is now really the top priority of everyone in United Nations, and I should say also from many members of the Security Council and the international community. The question now is really, is there sufficient space and for the member states to come up with the right solution and finding the people and the resources to have a fairly quick response, and that is, I think, is now being under discussion in New York, and I'm confident because what I can see is coming out from the discussions among the member states, and particularly the members of the Security Council, including the voice of the Secretary General of the United Nations, that this is now going to be a very important, it's an important priority, and my hope, of course, is that we're not going to fail, as you so correctly refer to.
I wonder if I can briefly ask you this question, because we only have a minute or so left on this part of the programme, but Abdul in Sudan has called us to say what has happened between the religious communities to cause this conflict. Briefly, if you could, sir.
Well, I understand that when this military coup happened earlier this year, there were particularly militant armed elements coming from the north, which is particularly the part of the Central African country that is Muslim, and when the people in the south and in the capital Bangui are Christians. And there was no indication that there was any religious implications in this military coup, so to say. But it has become that.
I do hope you'll forgive me for jumping in. It's incredibly rude of me, and I do hope you'll apologise. We're going to return back to this and let Anders Kompass fully answer that question. But stay with us on World Have Your Say. Welcome back. I'm Chloe Tilley. We're here live for the next 20 minutes talking about those political leaders who caught controversy but still remain popular enough to be elected and sometimes re-elected, from Silvio Berlusconi in Italy to Toronto's Rob Ford and Julia Gillard in Australia. We'll look at their appeal and why the media sometimes struggles with the popularity of some controversial politicians.
I experience. This is chaos. People are going to want to know.
Let's just say something.
Thanks for being with us here on World Have Your Say. Well, just before the break, I rudely interrupted Anders Kompass, head of UN Field Operations and Technical Cooperation Division in Geneva. And I want to just let him finish his response to that question. You were just explaining to us about the conflict between Muslims and Christians in the country and the implications of that. So please do continue.
Yes, I was referring to the fact that many of these elements that took power in earlier this year, the so-called Seleka armed groups, are coming from the northern part of Central African Republic that are dominantly Muslim, and in the south, where the capital is dominantly Christian. So there's been a clash in between these two religious communities that is becoming more and more serious, and that is also one reason why it's so important to react when there still is some time to stop this polarization and this ingredient of religious conflict and tensions among the communities that apparently was not there before. So it's something fairly new that came with this crisis this year.
Well, Albert Rudut-Simborwa is a journalist and political analyst in Kigali, and you've been waiting very patiently to speak to Anders Kompass, so please do go ahead.
Yeah, it's not immediately a question. It's more that I would like to share maybe a point of view. It's picking up also on what the other panelists were bringing up. Personally, my view on it, and with the experience that we have had the last 50 years in Africa with UN intervention, I can't just remember of one or two success stories of the UN. In general, it has been mitigated results, and in generally, people are pretty bitter about the UN interventions in Africa. And I'm from Rwanda, so I know what I'm talking about. It hasn't been better even after Rwanda, for real. So I don't think also we can be therefore too tough on AU interventions, because it just looks like it's a difficult game. So now for the Central African Republic, we have two levels of intervention. There is the emergency, of course, but even if we intervene now, if there is an intervention, after that someone has to manage after the intervention. So there is also a political aspect to it. It's not just coming in and stop something, because after that we need to help the republic to rebuild a nation and a political system. So therefore there need to be also of course a buy-in of the region to support the whole thing, because like we were saying before, it would spill over, it might destabilize the region more than we think and faster than we think. On the other hand, we do have some success stories of a healthy collaboration of the region, and also sharing with my colleague panelists also that you don't have to put political pressure on the other countries, because you can bring a horse to the water, but you can't tell it to drink. If it doesn't drink, it doesn't want to drink. And the two stories I'm talking about.
Do forgive me for interrupting, but let's get Anders Kompass to respond to that. And what's very interesting is this idea of the bitterness in certain parts of Africa about UN intervention. How do you respond to that?
I can absolutely hear what my colleagues have said, and I can fully understand it. I think, having said that, and when I was there, and what I understand now in Central African Republic, the people are desperate. The people are asking for help. And yes, it's a huge responsibility for the neighboring countries and for the international community, including United Nations, to help and to do it right. But when someone is on the emergency board, you really have to act, first of all, to save life. And yes, you're absolutely right. After that, you have to rethink and to do the reconstruction of this country in a different way, starting from the responsibility of the political leadership itself, but also with the support of the international community. And I fully agree that is still a very difficult challenge for everyone, including the United Nations. But as I said, what we are facing today, it doesn't really give us the luxury to discuss the bigger picture. We need to be aware of it, but we at the same time need to find now a response how we can save lives and stop the killings and help people that are desperate.
Well, when you talk about that response, I wonder if each of you have a view on this, whether we actually just expect too much from the UN, see the UN as a body that should be able to solve all of the world's ills, and maybe that's just not realistic.
Well, I think United Nations today is much more than the organization, or we who are working United Nations. And in Central African Republic, we are talking about a coalition of different parts of the international community, starting with the people itself, and then the region, the neighbors and the regional organizations in Africa, together with individual responses like the one from France and from the United Nations. And of course, that's the reality of today. Everyone have to do their part, but of course in a coordinated way that we can also be helpful and be effective on the ground. And I think in that sense, still United Nations and the other regional organizations is the framework we have, and we have to work within those framework that exist.
Julie, briefly, if you would, do you think that the expectations of the UN are too great?
No, they're not too great, because originally the organization was created for that, for world peace. But at the same time, we are talking about a continent which has a specificity today of being, where everybody's over optimistic in terms of economic growth, in terms of African Renaissance. African Renaissance implies also that the regional organization, which is the African Union, can come up with what it calls African solutions. But what have we witnessed? We have witnessed that there are diplomatic capabilities when it comes to gathering at Addis Ababa to criticize the ICC. But probably this suggests that these diplomatic capacities can be also used positively, efficiently, when the security of the citizens of the continent and when the territory of the continent is under threat. So this is also why the expectations are not too much. They are normal. But at the same time, for a continent which is supposedly rising, I'm using supposedly, and I'm insisting on the world, a continent which is supposedly rising does need an organization which can defend its interests in the political international scene. And it's not normal that 50 years after decolonization, it is still the colonial power which has to endorse the responsibility to be at the front line, although it is arguing that the AU would be at the forefront. But nevertheless, it remains that on the political scene, it is France who went to the UN, it is France who has been calling for a solution for many months now. And once again, it's a bit disappointing when it comes to the specific continent of Africa. That's what I wanted to
Well, Julie Owono, thank you, head of the Africa Desk at the Internet Without Borders, joining us from Paris. Thank you also to Jonathan Beeloff, Albert Rudat-Simbowa, and of course Anders Kompass, head of UN Field Operations and Technical Cooperation Division in Geneva. Well, for the next few minutes, we're going to turn our attention to Thailand. As you're well aware, anti-government protests have been taking place for 6 days now. But the Thai Prime Minister has said there's no way she's going to step down, and indeed she won't call early elections. Let's cross now over to Nopajak Atanon, who is a reporter at the Nation channel in Bangkok. Thank you so much for joining us on World Have Your Say. I appreciate it's late at night, but give us an idea of the mood in Bangkok. We hear that the Thai Prime Minister says there will not be any violent crackdown on protesters. Does it feel calm?
Well, I would say that the majority and a lot of people who are going on the protest right now are Bangkok people. So I'm a reporter who covering on the field. When I go down and cover on the protest ground, I can see a lot of people who are joining the protest from their house or their office and their working places. The mood of the people here in Bangkok are either they are joining the protest, or if some of them are against the protest, they are waiting for the result and waiting for the solution right now.
And what is that solution in your view? It's somewhat deadlocked at the moment.
Yes, it's somehow a deadlock at the moment right now, but well, it has to be one of the other way. It's either violence, maybe by the crackdown, but hopefully it won't happen that way. I hope there will be a talk or a discussion somehow. The positive thing is that at this situation right now, on both sides, they have learned from their experience. The government have learned from the past experience from the previous government, and also the protester, they learned from the previous protesting that they shouldn't use any violence because it reflects a bad image for the protest.
Okay, well, Nopajak Atanon, reporter at the Nation channel in Bangkok, thank you for joining us on World Have Your Say. Lots of live comments coming into us. Sarah in Bangkok posts on facebook.com/World Have Your Say. The protests are all about corruption and money game. Lots of you getting in touch from Sudan, Spain, the UK and Saudi Arabia. Do stay with us. We'll carry on talking in the next few minutes.
No, I absolutely talking about it.
Let me say something.
No, I absolutely talking about it.
Let me say something.
Well, welcome back to World Have Your Say. For the remainder of the programme, we're going to be talking about controversial leaders who are still very popular amongst voters. Of course, this week, Silvio Berlusconi, the former Italian Prime Minister, was expelled from Parliament after his tax conviction, also convicted of paying for sex with an underage prostitute. But still, you'll remember those pictures that were beamed out of Italy of many of his supporters crying at this decision by the Parliament. We're going to get some response on that, and also the likes of Rob Ford, the Toronto mayor, and also Julia Gillard, who of course was the Prime Minister of Australia. Let me introduce you to our guests who join us now live on the line. We are joined by Giorgio Melou, who is Editor-in-Chief of Panorama magazine in Milan. Kathy Lett is an Australian author in London, and also Saeed Khan is professor at Wayne State University, which is near Detroit. Let's go to Giorgio Melou, first of all, who is in Italy. For people watching around the world, they may see that Silvio Berlusconi is somewhat a figure of fun, his infamous bunga bunga parties. They may wonder why any Italian would actually vote for him. Tell us why he's so popular.
He's so popular because he knows the way to talk with the people. And when he went to the government in the last decades, he gave to Italy growth. He gave to Italy the meaning of life and the way to improve, to fight the unemployment. It's a way to live that put Italy in a stability. You know, because before Berlusconi went to government in Italy, a government stayed something less than 1 year. So when he entered in political with his party, Forza Italia, Go Italy in English, this party came for 5 years to the government. Stability means the capability to grow a country. And Berlusconi have the extraordinary capability of leadership. And you remember that he had a very important relationship around the world with Bill Clinton, with George Bush, with Vladimir Putin also, with the Prime Minister of England. So he has the capability to speak to a normal people in the same way to speak with the Prime Minister. I think that Italy loves him for this reason.
And you talk about that capability to talk to normal people. Let me read you some of the infamous comments which Silvio Berlusconi has made at the launch of his 2006 campaign. He said, "I am the Jesus Christ of politics. I'm a patient victim. I put up with everyone. I sacrifice myself for everyone." And also in 2011, when asked if women would like to have sex with me, 30% of women said yes, 70% replied, "What again?" This is what we're talking about with Silvio Berlusconi. I don't know, now's probably a good time to bring in Saeed Khan. Was he too much a figure of fun? Was he damaging to Italy, in your opinion?
Well, I think, Chloe, Silvio Berlusconi represents a sea change in the way that people around the world now perceive their politicians. Here in the United States, we're just coming off the 50th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And certainly the allure of Camelot brought with it a certain dimension by which a global leader like Kennedy was perceived. Now, most people see politicians in the same vein and through the same light as people see celebrities. So Clintons and Kardashians are really uttered in the same sentence, and we find that Berlusconi in many ways has provided an awful lot of entertainment. There's a certain voyeurism, there's a certain fetishization, and a fascination with him, and particularly as people wait with bated breath for the next statement that he makes, there seems to then be an awful lot of curiosity as to a character like Berlusconi, and in fact I think that's the appropriate word. He has become both a character and a caricature of himself.
Well, when we're talking about entertainment, probably one of the words that springs to mind, the people that spring to mind is Rob Ford, of course, the Toronto mayor. And I can see Tesla Latouche, a health economist in Toronto, smiling as I say that. Tesla, I know that you support Rob Ford, but once again, many people will say this is a man who's lied, he's admitted to smoking crack cocaine, he's been guilty, some would say, of being incredibly sexist. Why can you support that man?
Well, that's exactly why we love Rob Ford, I think, in this city. We have a love-hate relationship or perspective about him and his politics. He certainly has been authentic in his limitation, and I think he's brought to light a lot of the issues that are a lot of the social consciousness issues that are plaguing our city and our culture, really. And, in light of all of the other politicians that we're discussing here today, I think there's really nothing that differentiates Rob Ford except that he is he's true to his nature. And what we need to do right now is look at ways to support him through his challenges as a politician that we elected into office, and see how we can, as a culture, pull together to help this man deliver on his mandate.
Well, let's bring in Kathy Lett, who's an Australian author in London. And interesting if we bring in Julia Gillard here as an example, because she was really vilified by the press at home, wasn't she?
I think what happened to Julia Gillard proves that if you want to be a woman in politics, you have to strap on a bulletproof bra because it's twice as hard. I mean, as soon as she took office, we have a senator in Australia called Senator Bill Heffernan. He described her as being deliberately barren, implying that a woman is nothing more than a life support system to her ovaries. And the reason Australian men were quaking in their Ugg boots is that Julia Gillard's not just a woman. She's an unmarried, childless, proudly undomesticated atheist shacked up with her hairdresser boyfriend. And it just sent shockwaves through the men of the country. And they attacked her from the beginning to the end of her time in office on a very sexist level, calling her a witch. But Larry Pickering, one of our top cartoonists, always depicted her with a strap-on penis. I mean, it was really, really degrading. And what you realise too, as a woman in politics, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because in the beginning she was photographed with an empty fruit bowl in her kitchen. And, the papers went mad saying she's not a real woman. Who has an empty fruit bowl? And then later on, when she was photographed for a magazine knitting, they then derided her for pandering to the female stereotype. So I thought, you just can't win as a woman in politics, especially in Australia.
And it's quite interesting how in different countries the media picks up on controversial politicians. Saeed Khan, that example from Australia, but also we've seen the media turning against Rob Ford, also the media turning against Silvio Berlusconi. Does the media have a problem with controversial politicians and people actually liking them?
Well, the media is caught in this conundrum because on the one hand, it has to report the news, and certainly these politicians with their controversial remarks, their controversial overtures, and certainly their controversial deeds make it so very simple then for the media to do so. And in fact, the media then is compelled to report the news. And yet at the same time, we have to be mindful that these politicians are perceived, particularly by their most fervent defenders, as merely being reflections of themselves. If anything, these politicians provide an awful lot of validation for many people to say, well, if they're acting in this way, then perhaps our lives and some of our shortcomings and our flaws are somehow justified.
So it gives us an opportunity, Saeed Khan, to identify with our politicians. And it has to be said, many people are criticising around the world that enough of our politicians are not identifying with us. Well, thank you to all of my guests. That's all for this edition of World Have Your Say. Join me again soon.